fantasy intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Dave Kluge.
Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Dave's Weekend Warmup. We have had some great guests over the last few weeks, and we are going to keep it going today. We've got Thor Nystrom joining us with NBC Sports Edge. For those of you that don't already know Thor, he was a FSWA College Sports Writer of the Year, and he won some awards with Rolling Stones. He is the college football lead analyst as well as an NFL draft analyst. I have not done a ton of rookie prep yet this year, so I am thrilled to introduce Thor. Thor, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you on Twitter, what you've got going on right now, and whatever you're working on this offseason.
You can find me on Twitter at ThorKU, and just working on draft stuff, man. It's a fun time of the year. You know, like you go through the college season, and by the end of it, you're starting to run low on fuel, and then you have a couple weeks, and then all of a sudden you're right into draft season, and it just gets going again. It's just a super fun time of the year, going through these guys, trying to find sleepers. The guys at the top of the class are really fun, but the funnest thing to me is finding the sleepers, going a little bit deeper, because anyone can tell you, we're going to have a superlative contest with Trevor Lawrence here the next 2 months. It's going to be, annoying and whatever, and even, Zach Wilson, it's already started, and those different guys, but going through the other guys in the class and figuring out who are the gems, to me, that's the value of the process. That's the fun part of the process.
And that's something that you kind of were able to hang a hat on last year. I came across a podcast last May. So this was when Leonard Fournette was still on the Jaguars, and I heard you shouting out, hey, there's this guy, James Robinson, man. He went undrafted, but I was able to watch him play. And the fact that you were able to make that call, when Leonard Fournette was still on there, unbelievable. So you definitely find those deep holes, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit later on the show. But before we do that, I want to introduce Steffi Smalls, who everybody already knows. And before she tells you guys where you can find her, I just want to give a huge shout out to Steffi. I mean, she is arguably the hardest working person in the industry. She landed in Miami about an hour ago, checked straight into her hotel, got set up, and she's doing this show with us today. So, Steph, why don't you let everyone know what you got going on, where we can find you?
Yeah. What's up, guys? Steffi Smalls here from Miami. You can find me on Twitter at Steffi Smalls with 3 L's. Just doing my thing and join our circle, going on as many lives as possible. For those of you that saw my 3 last night, yes, I'm wearing the same hat. I will just call myself out for it now, but I am fresh off the plane, nothing on my face, and probably have COVID on me. But you know what? The graduation's off, and that's cool. That's where we are.
Yeah, only Steph goes to Miami just so she can live stream 3 times a day. And I, of course, am your host, Dave Kluge. We're going to kick off today's show by talking to Thor a little bit about his come up in the industry. We're going to go over some tips and tricks that you can use to help evaluate some talent for those of you that aren't scouts. And then we'll wrap up the show by going through some top prospects, where we expect them to land, and how that could possibly affect their fantasy value. So first of all, Thor, obviously, you have carved out a huge role for yourself in the fantasy football industry over the years. Well, more so the football industry, but a lot of fantasy footballers leech onto that. But reading some of your old work, it hasn't always been football for you. So when you went to KU and majored in journalism, was it always your plan to be a sports writer, or did you want to get into journalism and just kind of stumbled into this?
It was always sports journalism for me. I was talking about a buddy with this that was staying with us this past week. I was telling him, I'm doing what I've wanted to do since I was a kid. So a lot of this stuff, not that it comes naturally to me, but I just love immersing myself in this. And it's what I always imagine myself doing. Like, my mom makes jokes about how when I was a kid, I would be writing on little scraps of paper, like the draft guys. I would make my mom print off the 7 rounds when they were done, and then I would staple them. I'm talking when I was 6, 7, when the internet came. And so I had those like in a spot in my room, all the 7 rounds and stuff like that. And then I started doing mock drafts in class. I got caught a couple times, doing that kind of stuff. So, it's just super fun. I really enjoy what I do. It's a good time.
It's funny. I feel like a lot of people in the industry kind of have a similar story. My mom always tells a story about me as a little kid. I'd be sitting in the back seat and I'd have a stack of baseball cards and I'd be reading off stats to her. Did you know that Cal Ripken hit 285 and she would just listen to it, God bless her soul. But, and what about you, Steph? I mean, you have been kind of all over the place, going to school for some different things, and now you are blown up in the industry. Is this something you always kind of envisioned for yourself?
It's so funny because I told this story last night on with a podcast I was on with Linda. I don't think I ever told anyone. So I knew I was not exactly the same as everyone else when I showed up to school in my Plaxico Burres jersey. That was blue, not pink, not the pink jerseys. I showed up. This is middle school we're talking about. And people were like, "What are you wearing?" I'm like, "What do you mean? What am I wearing?" Like, I think I got sent to the principals. Like, I got into a whole thing. And then after that, I realized like maybe not everyone wants to watch football the way I do. I'm like, "Did you see his touch? You don't understand. You don't get it." Obviously, like freaking out like 5th grade me. So I think that it was always my mom is the one. She's the football fan in my family, so it's cool being a female, and I get my fandom from her, which is awesome. I think that another thing I was saying last night. She always said, "I would love to be a ref. I would love to be a ref." And now that there's a ref that's a chick, is so cool. That's like my childhood coming to life. So it's been from my mom and just continuing the. Maybe I'm taking it a little too far now. But
sometimes you find the industry and sometimes the industry finds you. So I don't want to get too deep into it, Thor, but when I was doing some digging on you, I came across some really, really cool pieces that you had written in your younger days. They were very, vulnerable and profound. You won some awards and a scholarship with that. I talked to you about it privately, and you said that it was one of the most gratifying things that you had ever done. So do you still have an outlet for that type of writing, or is sports writing right now just, the main focus for you?
Yeah, I do. I got really lucky where, like I said, I was always sitting dead red on being a sports journalist. It's the reason I went to Kansas. I'm from northern Minnesota. I'm from Brainerd, 2 hours north of Minneapolis, 10 hours away from Lawrence. But I wanted to go to a D1 school because I wanted to cover D1 athletics, because I wanted to work for a D1 newspaper. And so, that's why I ended up going to Kansas. And, from there, it was just getting on, with that and doing that, working up, becoming a columnist eventually and stuff like that. But yeah, as a part of the journalism classes, you had to do like an in-depth story. And so there was, specifically one example, but there was a couple times where I went outside of sports just because I felt like I had a story to tell, and you talk about vulnerable, like I'd never, written things that were non-sports before. So, I mean, even just sort of doing that outside of, what the subject matter was, which is very personal to me. It was a story from my life. That was interesting, but, like I said, it was a gratifying experience because I ended up writing a story that won the Rolling Stone College Writing Award. And that got me into the University of Iowa's grad writing program to study nonfiction writing. And so then I did that for 3 years, which I never thought I would do. I hated school. I never thought I would go back, especially to grad school. But I put off getting into, going into sports journalism for 3 years because of that. I'd had an internship with MLB.com right after Kansas, that I did for one season. And then, like I said, I was just lucky enough that I got into this writing school because the last story I wrote in college happened to be a non-sports story that did well. And then I went to Iowa, and I was there for 3 years. Then I ended up teaching in China for a year, another experience I wouldn't have had. So it was really cool. And then, to your point, what I went there for was learning how to write books, nonfiction books. So I have a manuscript, I have an agent, things that are completely on the side of what I do with sports. So, yeah, I mean, I like there's some people that go into what, I went into that they don't really know what they want to do with their lives, and they think this would be fun. I'm more like the only talent I have in the world is writing. I just got lucky with that. And I just happened to be obsessed from the start with college football and the NFL draft. And so, but yeah, I have different outlets to write about non-sports things as well, for sure.
Well, I wouldn't say writing's your only talent. You can also grow a hell of a beard, so I take a little bit of pride in that.
They kick you out of Minnesota if you can't, especially if your name's Thor. Like,
and this time you need one.
I feel like the name of being Thor has to count for something.
Yeah, I mean, if I couldn't have grown a beard, like living in Minnesota with this name, it would have been bad. So it's lucky I can.
Well, it's cool to see somebody like you who knew from a young age that this is what you wanted to do and you went to school for it. You know, I'm somebody like a lot of other people who were fans that would just talk football a lot and, you know, write some things here and there and then said, hey, let me see if I can turn this into a passion. But to see somebody like you, who that's been your passion for such a young age and following that, that's a really cool story. So, Thor, when I introduced you, I said, you know, Thor with NBC Sports Edge, and a lot of people might have raised their eyebrows and not heard of NBC Sports Edge. Your company has been a pretty hot topic for the last week because it was RotoWorld, officially rebranded and is now NBC Sports Edge. So has that changed anything for you behind the scenes or your day-to-day, or is it just kind of the same thing with a different name?
Yeah, it's changed nothing whatsoever. I mean, not only for me, but I think anyone that worked at RotoWorld, you know, sort of for us, it's literally just a name change and sort of a paint job change. You know, it sort of went from red to black. But outside of that, I mean, we're doing the same things, and we're hoping it opens up, you know, possibilities to do some more things, you know, that we like to do. But yeah, just as far as the day to day, nothing changed. So I found it really funny on like online when people were like, "Oh, RotoWorld's dead," and you know, what am I going to do now? And these idiots, you know, like submarine to, you know, this website, and it's like, no, we're still here. Like, you know, we haven't gone anywhere.
Yeah.
I got a new name on Twitter. It's fine. I decided my name was going to be Stephanie Smalls. It's not my name. It's just a new name.
There you go. You rebranded.
And for anyone that's that upset about it, you can still type in rotoworld.com. It'll redirect you right to the same page. They still have their fantastic player news and all that. So not a huge change there. Now let's talk about a couple things that you've done specifically. I love asking people this question because not a lot of people like asking it, but I feel like it's an important one to ask. Everybody loves their victory laps nowadays. You know, oh, I said that Deontay Johnson was going to have his breakout year. I said that, you know, Justin Herbert was going to be great, but nobody likes to talk about their misses. So you've been doing this for a long time now. What's one miss that kind of sticks out in your head that you can remember? And, you know, would you still follow that same process?
I'll give you a huge one, and it still befuddles me, which is why I still think about it. It's not just embarrassing to me personally, but I don't even, you know, following the thought process that led me to this, it's hard for me to even get back there. But I was one of the very few people. This is the good part of this. I'll start with the part of the story where I can pat myself on the back. I was one of the very few people in the industry when Lamar Jackson was coming into the NFL that ranked him as a top 5 overall not as a top 5 quarterback. I ranked him as a top 5 overall prospect in that class. That's the good part. The bad part is I had Lamar Jackson quarterback 2. The guy that I had quarterback 1 was a guy named Josh Rosen, who I had number 1 overall. And so it's hard for me to brag about the Lamar Jackson thing when I had Rosen even higher. It's just embarrassing. It would be such a cap on my career if I could just, you know, show the unadulterated board with Lamar, but, you know, 4 spots ahead of him, Josh Rosen is always going to be staring down at him. But yeah, that's probably the biggest one to me, just because for me, Lamar Jackson was probably the highest profile hit I've ever had, you know, as far as being right on a guy when a lot of other people went the other way. And Josh Rosen, I could not have been more wrong about. So they happened in the same class.
Props to you. When you started that story, I thought you were going to say you had Lamar Jackson as the running back number 1. Because that would have been a huge whip and a lot of
No, not Bill Polian. I watched the games.
Now, what about you, Steph? Besides being a Giants fan, what would you say your biggest miss is?
Hey, listen, Mr. Bears fan. Okay, let's not go there. All right.
We've all had them.
Yeah, of course we have. I think that I defended Ingram to his death this year, and then you can't even defend him anymore. He stinks. I think Darnold is probably one of my worst ones. I really did. I thought he was going to just come and flourish, and he didn't do that. Is it Gase? Maybe, but Darnold, I still believe in Darnold. I believe in him. I think he can do it. Just he needs to go somewhere else.
There's a lot of rumors about him, getting traded, and we've seen it with Ryan Tannehill, Jarvis Landry, Kenny and Drake, all these guys. They get out from under Gase's shadow and they suddenly blow up. So we might be able to see a second half of a career from Darnold that could be a little bit more promising. Really, though, I just asked you that question because I wanted to hear you have to say something bad about Evan Ingram. I knew that's where it was going.
I know everyone wanted to Jones. I'm not saying it because I haven't given up yet. So it hasn't been a bad deal.
So back to you, Thor. There's a lot of metrics that go into college scouting. We've got speed and height and weight, and then we've got BMI, which is a combination of both, and strength, and 40 time, and all of these things. So of all of those standards, what's the one that you'd say that you weigh the heaviest, and which is the one that's just the least important to you that you don't really care about?
Well, the most important is your last year of tape. Or the way that you played in your last season. And then after that, it would be some sort of, size adjusted. If you're just going to talk about literally one metric, if I had a second one, it would be the size adjusted score of their athleticism. If you're just going to boil it down to one thing, because you can ballpark it quick, and there's some guys that you can eliminate from ever being, an NFL standout just because of their, that. But there's nothing is ever going to replace that last year of tape, which is why, this year, I thought last year was the most fascinating NFL draft of all time because of the way that COVID unexpectedly just wreaked havoc on the pre-draft process, essentially, just erased it after the combine. But this year, not only has it, sort of pre-erased the combine and changed that entire process to where we're now going to get the testing scores from pro days, which is going to be interesting because some schools famously screw around with that and fudge around with that. It's going to be interesting to see how they get a uniform thing. It's not only that, but there's several guys in this class that, for instance, Trey Lance played one game in 2020. There's some guys that played 3. There's some guys like Jamie Newman, Micah Parsons, Gregory Rousseau. We can go down the line. Many guys, Rashawn Slater, that played 0, that opted out of the whole thing. And so there's very few guys that played, 10 or more, when you're talking, but in the past classes, it would be almost every single guy, their last year. So, right. When you talk about doing even more projection, which is sort of the hardest part of this, because it's easy to just watch the game and be like, this is what this guy is right now. The harder thing is, sort of thinking about him and how all these different things are going to translate or whatever to the next level. And with, for instance, just a guy, Trey Lance, a guy who's historically inexperienced coming into the NFL, but he also had a historically good season in the FCS, but it was a historic season. He had a 28-0 TDI&T ratio and led him to the national title game. I don't know that that's happened, especially with a quarterback that rushed for 1,000 yards or whatever on 8 yards a carry. His tools are ridiculous. So, but you're going to have to weigh the two things. Jamie Newman is a prospect that's a tier 2 down. It's a very similar thing. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating this year just because of all that different stuff.
So if I'm hearing you right, do you think this is going to be one of the years in the draft where we can have a lot of huge misses in the first round, a lot of huge reaches, some guys that, because we weren't able to get that normal evaluation that we get the year before. So is this going to be one of those years where we might be looking back being like, wow, that 2020 draft was a little all over the place? Perhaps.
I think it's, even in the moment, I think, what this is going to lead to probably is an extremely unexpected, initial first round that cascades down. Last year, we didn't know what to expect about anything. And it sort of manifested where there was less trades and stuff like that. In some ways it was less interesting, although, just in terms of the mechanics of the board, although there was still, surprising things up till the, for instance, the wide receivers, the top 3 seem to get inverted there, whereas Ruggs, Lamb, Judy or whatever, that you could have gotten really long odds on that order beforehand. But just in terms of what it did to front offices, they were a lot less aggressive, and I'm not sure if that was because they knew that the cameras, if Cliff knew the camera was in on him and his GQ spread, and Mike Zimmer knew the camera was always showing him with in his hunting lodge with all the the obscene animals all over the place. I'm not really sure, but it just just that the people are not in the room, of the teams or whatever. But in this one again, because again, to me, and I think to people that evaluate whatever, the most important thing, having, far less of that last year of tape on just about dang near every prospect. And again, not of it on some of them, it requires more of that projection, which is like, that's where you get into imagination, right? Like who they are right now, it's a finite thing. You don't necessarily need to be an expert or anything, to know who's good at playing, whatever. But it's like, again, the projection thing. And so when you bring the imagination into it, it's a wider thing. And it's going to bring with it a wider set of outcomes and variances. And so it's also going to be interesting leading up to that, the media reports we get, as far as like smoke screens and stuff, because there's various prospects in this class that I think have, at this point, even in the first round, have like a 10 pick, 12 pick, at least band of outcomes of where they could go at minimum right now. I mean, Trey Lance is a very good example of this. I could see Trey Lance going as early as 2, at the end of the day. If he has just an enormous pre-draft process, he's a guy where it's just going to take the one team to dream on him. You don't see mistakes with him on tape. He doesn't make any mistakes, and he's such an explosive player. The dichotomy of those two things in the NFL obviously is extremely valuable. But again, because of that historical experience, things I talked about before. But if there's a team that's willing to sort of accept the the odds of the bust, being higher there, they're also going to get with it a higher ceiling. So it's going to be interesting to see the way that teams weigh this in their own head, because that's unprecedented as well. It's not just unprecedented, these prospects bringing in, lighter resumes than we typically see. It's also unprecedented seeing the way that manifests with the front offices and the way that they untangle that in their head, and the way that actually manifests in terms of like top to bottom of the board, who falls, who goes higher. Are these front offices in mass? Are they going to give, credit to some of these guys that opted out? Are they going to, not nick them as much and, stuff like that, dream on them a little bit more, or are those guys going to get hurt? It's conjecture at this point. Nobody knows. It's an unforeseen scenario. So it's sort of a Wild West process, even just heading in.
So yeah, you talk about that, the smoke screens and how, how hard it is to guess what's going to happen this time of year. And I feel like we're already starting to see the talk where they're saying, hey, maybe Jacksonville will take Trey Lance, maybe Jacksonville will take Zach Wilson. Now, as far as I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, you haven't done a mock draft since August, right? That was the last time you've done an NFL mock. And you had Trevor Lawrence go in one there. I mean, is there any chance that the Jacksonville Jaguars don't go with Trevor Lawrence?
None.
0% chance.
Bet the farm.
All right.
There's got to be people, they got to have something to talk about. And here's the thing, what I found funny about these media reports about the, if I can just go off on a tangent for a second, what I found funny about the media reports of the Zach Wilson over Trevor Lawrence on some teams' boards, it's funny for a couple different reasons. Number one, I mean, if you guys remember last spring, I mean, there's numerous examples of this, but just one from last class was like, Tua going up into the draft, it was like everyone, is the worst kept secret in the draft was that Dolphins love Tua. And then, of course, like a month and a half, 2 months before the draft, so around the time that we're at now, the reports started to come out that the Dolphins, they actually never did like Tua. That was all a lie, and they're actually going to pick Herbert, and they were just lying before, and whatever. So that was the smoke screen. But they're and so there was a lot of reports like that. You don't trust reports. I mean, this early, first of all, Tony Pauline is a guy who's really well connected, who he wrote after the fact that he thought this report was BS. And whether you agree with that or not, what you can't disagree with is there's only one board where it actually matters, and that's Jacksonville's. If some team down at 12 wants to call up, hey, Matt Biller, if they want to call him and say, we have Zach Wilson above Trevor Lawrence, they're not risking anything. There's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't do that. Why not toss? That's why this, SHIT, I'm not sure if I can swear on here, but that's why this stuff gets out there.
I'm on today, you can.
Oh, okay. That's why this shit gets out there. It's just, that's why the Tua stuff got, that was a little bit of a different situation, but unless it's coming from Urban Meyer, it doesn't effing matter. And everyone else who is saying it has a vested interest to say whatever they're saying. They have no stake in the game. So to me, those rumors or those reports, sure. I mean, technically, sure, maybe a few teams do have Zach Wilson, but there's, above, but there's only one team that matters. And the rest of them could be and maybe and probably are lying. So,
I feel like you see this almost every single time. There's, for all intents and purposes, Trevor Lawrence is a generational talent. And you saw this when Luck was coming into the league. They're like, oh, RG3 might go number one. And then you saw it when Peyton Manning was coming into the league. And I feel like that time from the end of the Super Bowl until the start of free agency is just the slowest time in the world for news. So I feel like the media is just making stories to have something to talk about. What do you have to say, Steph?
No, yesterday I tweeted, I don't know, some people may have seen it. It was like, can we get to the part of the season where everyone realizes that they overhyped a player and then we can just accept it and move on? Like, I'm ready to get there. I don't want to, I'm sick of the part where we're hyping up players and then 90% of you are wrong. You're ready to get your heart broken again. You guys love it. Everyone loves the pain for some reason.
This time of year is slow, man. You start seeing stories about Christian McCaffrey in 3 firsts going for Watson. There's a lot of slow talk this time of year. But Thor, another question I've got for you. So there are a lot of teams right now that just have like gaping positional holes that need to be filled. So outside of the lock where we've got Jacksonville taking Trevor Lawrence there, what is one team that you can just guarantee that they are going to be drafting off of position only because they have a slot that they need to fill in the first round?
I mean, outside of Jacksonville, it's tough, right? Because, first of all, we haven't seen free agency. Second of all, there's still these dominoes of some of these quarterbacks to go. I mean, you just start at the number 2 pick. Like, the Jets, what are they going to do? Or, are they going to – there was the reports today they're asking for a second for Sam Darnold. Some team going to find that reasonable. Obviously, if that trade happens before the draft, then, of course, the Jets would become the answer to that question. They're going to take a quarterback. But, other teams you would certainly suspect, it seems like Carolina would really like someone in there, at least so that they don't have to count on Teddy beyond this coming season at the very least. And some other, Philly obviously just made the trade with Indianapolis, but they have Jalen Hurts coming back. So, do they do a guy where, initially where they think he's going to help Jalen Hurts and, maybe later on you take a guy that you think could eventually push him, or, do you take the guy high? It's really hard to say right now, again, because of all of the processes of the offseason that have not happened yet. And this offseason is particularly compelling because we usually don't see this many starting quarterbacks either. They've already traded spots. We usually don't see that, but it really seems like there's more to come. And then we also have, a quarterback class that's one of the better quarterback classes that we've seen here in the last 5-10 years. So you have those two things working sort of in concert. And then of course, free agency is going to be coming in a month or so. And that, that's going to do certain things to it as well. So a lot of things are still sort of up in the air. And to be honest with you, like, that's one reason why I haven't done a mock like after the season. I know it's a popular thing to do, but to me, I'm just not sure. Like you said, I have Trevor Lawrence to Jacksonville in my last mock. I don't really see a need to change that yet. And I would sort of like to see some of the way that these things fall because we just don't know yet. And so you can make your picks based on how it sits now, but it's going to change in a couple. It just changed when Wentz was traded, that would have changed multiple picks, and it's going to change again in a week, in 2 weeks. And, it's going to change a heck of a lot in March. So that's why I'm waiting on those.
Yeah, I'm with you. Even trying to do fantasy football rankings right now, you're looking at like in the top 20 wide receivers, there's 4 guys that you don't even know where they're going to be playing next year, and that is really going to affect their value. So this time of year is certainly tough. I've been hitting some writer's block myself trying to find things to talk about because really people are just kind of pulling stuff out of thin air. There isn't a lot to talk about until free agency opens.
It's so brain rank right now. It's so crazy to me. You have no idea, especially what coaching system they're going to end up with, what quarterback they're going to have. Do they have a good old? There's so many factors that play into it. I'm not touching it yet. There's no way.
So, like I said, I don't paint a picture of myself to be something I'm not. I've said this on Twitter many times. I am not somebody who has time to watch college football. I love the NFL. If I watched as much college football as NFL football, I wouldn't have a wife. I've got to make some time for her, and so I put all of my energy into NFL. Something that really jumped out to me, though, is in the last 15 years, we have only had 5 non-quarterbacks win the Heisman Trophy. One of them obviously being this year with Devonta Smith. You look at all these other guys, and they were all, the top of their position to get drafted. So why is it that so many other wide receivers are getting drafted or projected to be drafted at least ahead of Devonta Smith this year, even though he's coming off the Heisman win?
Well, I'd be surprised if more than Jamar ends up ahead of him, but I certainly won't be surprised if Jamar does. And I just
think Jalen Waddle in a lot of cases too.
Yeah, and right now, certainly Smith would be the chalk to be at least top 2. But like we mentioned last year, he's less of a chalk against Waddle than you would have said at last year at this time that Judy was against Ruggs, and Ruggs got overtaken. And Waddle has, very similar to Ruggs, he's got the trump card that a team can dream on, just in the insane athleticism. Not quite the same. Waddle's, I think, is a more dynamic player. But yeah, those are the reasons why. But I just think Jamar, he's such a good prospect. And Devonta had one of the, and it might be the most impressive season, in the last decade I've seen, at receiver. But similar to Mac Jones and similar, to some of that other stuff, you have to keep in mind the context of the offense that he played in and the system that he played in. He got a lot of production off of screens and stuff like that, and where he was moving around. Steve Sarkisian he got the Texas job for a reason. He's a very smart play caller. But you don't take anything away from Devonta. It's just, he is a skinnier guy. So you're concerned about that in conjunction with the lack of high end, athleticism. But in terms of the ball skills, in terms of the way he runs his routes, everything like that, he's divine. You're looking at a guy, potentially sort of like Marvin Harrison. So just sort of the sticker, when you go to the car lot and you buy it, he might not be quite as sexy as a guy like Jamar, just sort of like looking at him on the field. But obviously he's a great player. We just saw him shred everything. Jamar was obviously in a very good, situation too. I don't want to make it seem like he would get in the ball from, the number 1 overall pick. And he would, the guy in the slot was the best rookie receiver, in my opinion, the best rookie in all of football this year, Justin Jefferson. So like he was obviously in a very good situation as well. But it's going to be interesting, and Waddle is more athletic than both. So, it's interesting that, it's an interesting class, the receiver class. It's another good one. I don't know if it's quite as good as last year, which was historic, but it's pretty dang close.
I feel like last year we had a historic wide receiver class, running back class. We were hitting on everything last year. I do want to give a quick shout out though. Juan Carlos Pena, one of the teammates on our team over at Fantasy Intervention. I saw him in the chat earlier. I'm not sure if he's still here, but he just wrote an article. He's got this whole series calling it his Doppelganger series, where he talks about guys that have their kind of historic guys that are their doppelganger. And he just wrote a fantastic piece about Devonta Smith and Marvin Harrison, which is the connection you just made. So be sure to check that out. And props to Juan for making that connection. We already talked about it a little bit, so you don't think that there's any chance of Jalen Waddle going over Devonta Smith. Steph, have you started taking a look at this yet? Is that something that you could potentially see happening?
So I haven't done. I've just finished tight ends because I think what happens every year is there's a focus that gets put on certain classes. So it'll be, the wide receivers are great this year. The quarterbacks are great this year. And then we forget about the other positions. So I started with the tight ends. And I think that this is one of those groups that everyone was like, oh, it's okay. There's Pitts and it's okay. No, there's some really, really talented guys. So I think it'll be interesting, especially in the position that we're in the league with the tight ends. It's weird. There's 3 tight ends, and then I don't know what's going on with everyone else. So I think that there's going to be room for these guys, these rookie tight ends, to come in and make a name for themselves if they end up in the right place. So I haven't touched the wide receivers yet. It gets a little messy. So I picked Devonta. I did pick Devonta in when we did the fantasy intervention draft. I took him at 107. Right. But I think that it could go any way. That you don't know what's going to happen. It's so crazy. So great.
Speaking about rookie tight ends, I just want to put you on the spot here for a second, Thor. Historically, rookie tight ends haven't done much at all. Do you think Pitts can kind of be the difference? Do you think he's somebody that can come in as a rookie and immediately get it done, or are we kind of going to have to have that same learning curve with him that every other tight end has had?
As far as a rookie coming in and producing as a receiver, for sure, just because he's the most gifted one to come in as a receiver. it's. I mean, like you can do the Andrew Luck thing with Lawrence. It's hard to find a guy to comp Pitts to, because he's basically just. I mean, like he's sort of just a jumbo receiver. He just moves like a receiver, right? But you can play him at inline blocker, and he'll give you effort as a blocker too. He lacks a little bit of power, but that's nitpicking a bit. But you can move Pitts around. Obviously, play him in slide and play him outside if you want. I mean, play him wherever you want. He's just a different thing. And so like, people that are poo-pooing the tight end class, I mean, you have to acknowledge that there's, a once in a generation tight end prospect sitting atop it. And Steph, I agree with you. Like Pat Freiermuth is a very interesting tight end prospect. And then going down a little bit, there's some really interesting guys, sleepers down the line and stuff like that. But Freiermuth in a regular class, people would be talking him up quite a bit, but just because of Pitts, he doesn't get talked about as much, but I think he's a heck of a player. He's sort of like a poor man's Gronk in the way he plays.
For sure, definitely. I was hoping that you were going to name my sleeper tight end.
Was it Zach? Is it the kid from Central Missouri?
It's Trey McKitty.
Okay.
I love him. I don't know what it is. He's a little slow, but he's big bodied, really good hands, and he's smart. I think that he kind of got the short stick there, but his most recent film and his Senior Bowl performance was impressive. I think for people that didn't watch a Senior Bowl, if you're not really a college football person, but you want to just get your toes a little wet in the rookies, that's a really good place to start. I think I enjoyed the Senior Bowl this year, actually. I think that it gave me a place that's where I didn't know about Trey McKitty. Are you kidding? Now I'm staying up till 2 a.m. watching Trey McKitty film and crap out of the team because I'm like, I'm telling you, this is the guy.
So we hit on it a little bit earlier, but just the impact that the 2020 rookie class made in the NFL this year. I mean, I'm not even going to try to list them because there were like 25 guys that just came in as rookies and immediately started producing. Do you think that there's anybody that's going to make a similar impression this year in 2021 that's just going to hit the ground running immediately and just be a stud right out the gate?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot, Pitts is, we were just talking about one of them. It's going to, again, to me, the interesting thing is always finding the guys that come in and produce right away that, you can get cheaper for free, L'Jarius Sneed and, James Robinson, some of those guys. There's guys, and especially this year with it being a more unpredictable draft, it might open up some opportunities where you see more mid to late round guys that potentially could come in and start right away, where evaluations were missed, maybe because of missing information, incomplete profiles, et cetera. But yeah, I think you're going to see that a lot. You're certainly going to see at least 3 of the quarterbacks starting early, probably 4. And heck, it might even get closer to 5 or 6 by the end of the season. You're going to see a lot of these guys, the running backs, we have the 2 guys sitting at the very top, but there's more guys than that are going to come in and play immediately. So yeah, a lot, both for fantasy, but then just overall as well, defensively, et cetera.
So of these top prospects, is there anybody that you're expecting just not to really perform? I mean, is there anybody that you think is a bit of a trap? Some of these running backs that are coming in.
As far as running backs, I probably wouldn't be quite as high on Michael Carter as some other guys. He's a little bit small and niche-y, and he had the great fortune of playing in an offense that very much suited his skills, playing next to Javonte as well. And there's a lot of RPOs and stuff like that in that offense. I think he's seen as a top 4, top 5 running back right now. I see him as more of a complimentary guy, I guess. That'd be an example there. I'm a little bit lower on Zach Wilson than some others, especially now that he's seen as like a top 2, top 3 type overall prospect. I'm not quite as high on him. I would have him quarterback 4. I'm definitely way lower on Mac Jones. I'm definitely way lower on Trask. I wouldn't use a premium pick on those guys. Those are just some. Those are a few.
Yeah, I see a lot of mock drafts with my Bears taking Trask at 21, and I'm not really too crazy about that one. One guy I want to ask you about real quickly, because it's somebody that we talk about a lot on our team. Chase Vernon, he kind of started the hype train with this guy. Now, I've been watching some of his film, and he just pops on film. Kenneth Gainwell, is that a guy that's going to make an immediate impact as a rookie?
Gainwell's fun, but he's another kid that he's young. He doesn't have a lot of experience, and we didn't see him in 2020. So he's another interesting kid, in terms of that. And also he's coming from a system that very much behooved his skill set in a very, as we've seen in recent years, very running back friendly system at Memphis. How many running backs, or H backs or what, have they sent into the NFL? But Gainwell can do a lot of things, right? And so when you're comparing, again, interesting things that just are coming from this year's draft itself, scenarios that you find yourself, but thought experiments of I'm sure that Michael Carter and Gainwell, for instance, are seen similar to each other right now. But, we've seen Carter do a lot of different things over a couple different years. We sort of have a good idea of what his skill set is. We've seen him against good defenses, et cetera. Whereas Gainwell, again, it's less. We didn't see him this past year. You have that one really, really good season. And he's a younger kid, but you could also argue it the other way and say, he doesn't have as much wear on the tires. So, you can just sort of start spinning that, different way. And I think you're going to see that with draft analysts this year, just whoever they specifically like, they'll just frame the argument in their way. And then, the way that you can nitpick them, whatever, because in this class, I think there's more of an opportunity to do that. But yeah, Gainwell's a very interesting running back prospect outside of that top two, in a running back class where there's a lot of interesting guys in that, sort of group to pick between. There's a lot of guys in that, tier 2, 3, 4 that we're gonna have to sort through for sure leading up to the draft.
And there's when playing dynasty football, people look at age so much. So I think that him being a little bit younger makes people want him even more. And then having the year off also, legs a little bit fresher. When you start getting into this hardcore dynasty fantasy football analysis, people are sitting there nitpicking age over a couple months. That's going to make a big difference in the grand scheme of things. But Kenny Gainwell having that young age, I feel like that's just going to make him start shooting up fantasy football boards.
I love when they write 27, 2 months and 19 days. No one cares. It does not matter. Yeah, he's 20.
So
yeah, I think just to put a cap on Gainwell, I think that what it's going to be for him. The interesting thing is going to be how he tests, because he can't. These guys that opt out, they can't affect. That they just don't have the thing that I was talking about was the most important thing there. Their 2020 tape or whatever. He certainly has good 2019 tape in that system. But the thing with him, he has a lot of good traits, like we mentioned. But the one thing that concerns you is he sort of has that scat back build, but he lacks high end speed, and so you wonder is he going to be confined to be is he just going to be like Motor Singletary, or can he be a better version of a Kareem Hunt, someone like that. But once we see his testing, it's going to be interesting to see what his high end speed ends up being. And then, we already know that he can change directions. So that's, and we already know that he can catch the ball. That's another thing that he has going for him. So, he's a very elusive small back that can catch the ball very well. So for people looking, he has things that you're interested in for sure. But yeah, for his process, I want to see how fast he runs, and I want to see what the rest of his athletic profile looks like.
Yeah, and we got Chase weighing in here saying that he wants to see how Kenny Gainwell weighs in, especially after a year off. You want to make sure that he hasn't, packed on a bunch of weight on the year off or anything like that. But the comparison that you made to Kareem Hunt, that's spot on. I didn't even make that comparison in my head, but now that's all I'm going to be able to see. They play such a similar style of ball. So in the very beginning of the show, you mentioned how deep this quarterback class is. And, that's no huge surprise to anybody. We've got Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Justin Field, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, Kyle Trask. Out of all of those guys, how many do you expect to be starting week 1 of the 2021 season?
Oh, man, you probably set the over-under at 3.5, right? I don't think Lance is going to be. I think the interesting one will be if Mac Jones is. But I think Lawrence is going to be for sure. Zach Wilson, you would assume, is going to be for sure. Because Zach Wilson, he's already finished. What Zach Wilson does, whether you like him or you don't like him, he already does that, right? He doesn't. There's no. Whereas with Trey Lance, there's actually things he has to work on that he can get better at off of the field and watching and stuff like that. But Wilson, I think will start right away, and I don't see a reason why Justin Fields wouldn't start right away either. So it's just going to come down, I think, probably to whether Mac Jones what how high does he end up going? Because I think, like you mentioned, Kyle Trask, it's a joke for, I'll just say it's a joke for him to be mocked in the first round. He's not a first round quarterback. I'm not even sure that he's a second round quarterback. Mac Jones, people have him going. I've seen some ludicrous draft placements for Mac Jones that do not fit, in my opinion, what reality is, because it's not taking into consideration what his actual physical skill set is. It's just above his import, I guess. And so I personally expect Mac Jones to be lower once the draft season comes. I'm not sure on that. I know that Benjamin Robinson guy does the mocking the mocks or whatever, where he has like the whatever, like where are they, we're going in the mocks right now, whatever. I'm sure Mac Jones is much higher now at this moment than he's going to end up going. He just, to me, it seems like a guy, he got the hype coming in because the system he played in, and whatever. And as the thing goes along, I would expect Lance to at the very least to soundly pass him for QB4, but it'll be interesting to see, where does he go? If it's the first round, he's certainly going to have a shot to start right away. If he falls into the second round, it's going to be by a team that, of course, bypassed a quarterback in the first round. So they have to at least be okay with their situation at the time. So, then it would just be more of a, throw your hands up. So I'd set the over under at 3.5.
All right. Yeah, I know a couple guys on the team kind of joke around and call me a helmet scout often, but you see it all the time. These Alabama quarterbacks, they just start flying up draft boards because, they're winners, and they did it in Alabama. We saw it with Ryan Mallett. We saw it with, is it too early to say Tua? But I'll leave that one. but yeah, a lot of people are saying that with Mac Jones. That just, the winning is going to cause him to get drafted a lot higher than he deserves to be. Steph, what do you think of these quarterbacks coming in? Are there any that you see starting week one? Outside of the big two?
There's definitely so it's a weird situation with what's going on with the quarterbacks. This is not a normal year. There's teams that have low draft picks that could easily trade up. The order could get all. I think about Washington. I think Washington, if they're smart right now, there's someone that's calling someone up at the top, and they are getting a stud quarterback for that team because they're ready. That's a team that's ready. So I am not touching these quarterbacks. Are there going to be starters? Absolutely. But I'm kind of scarred after seeing what happened with these guys that we talk about all the time. We're looking at what? We're going into 2021, and no one knows where Darnold's going to play because he stinks. If you told someone that years ago, they would have laughed in your face. What do you mean he stinks? So it's so hard to evaluate. And what makes it worse, or maybe not worse, it's interesting for everyone else, is what's going on with the quarterbacks. We don't know. There's still teams with no quarterback at all. Dak hasn't re-signed a contract. It's a crazy year.
Yeah, this is a year where I don't know if I've ever seen much of a bigger quarterback shuffle before. We can go into 2021 where almost 50% of the teams are going to have a different week one starter than they had in 2020. And I'm here for it. I'm excited, especially with all these one-year contracts. And then we might see it all over again in 2022 because of the salary cap. So it's a fun couple of years.
A lot of these vets are going to get dropped, and they're going to sign one. There's going to be 1-year contracts everywhere, literally all over the league. So then you're going to see these guys having to really play for their contracts in 2022. So things are going to get so spicy up in here, right? It's going to get sweet, and there's going to be good football to be played next year. There's a lot of teams ready. They're ready. They're missing 3 pieces. So I'm so excited for next year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, I mentioned it early in the show, but something I was just blown away by was the call that you made on James Robinson last May, almost immediately after the draft. And believe it or not, he's somebody that I actually had eyes on. My wife and a lot of my friends went to Illinois State, so he was somebody that I was a little bit intrigued by and surprised that he did go undrafted. But who are some guys this year, and I know this is such a broad question and you probably hate getting asked it, but who are those late round guys that you're going to be keeping an eye on that you think that could possibly land in a situation where, somebody could get drafted in the 5th round, 6th round, maybe go undrafted and still make an impact as a rookie?
Yeah, it's interesting because, without having the athletic profiles on the running backs, it especially with that position, because that's so important, it's hard to know how it's going to shake out right now. But, for instance, before the last, 3 games of Ohio State season, Trey Sermon probably would have been a 6th round pick or so. Now he might be a 3rd or so, but I'm not exactly sure. Some of that might be dependent on, both medicals, but also the way he tests. But he's a guy that I like a lot. I think he could come in and play right away. I'm not sure that he's going to be overlooked, but then again, he did have a hard time getting on and staying on the field at Oklahoma, and then early on at Ohio State. Some of was injury related, but Kennedy Brooks did bypass him at Oklahoma, so some of that stuff he's going to have to answer for, and stuff like that. But he looks so good at the end of the season, just ripping folks up. It's really too bad that he got injured at the beginning of the national title game. Ohio State really needed him. And I think, if Trey Sermon is healthy in that game could have played out slightly differently. But obviously he goes down early and it was what it was. But he's one guy, going lower. Javian Hawkins is interesting to me. I like Javian Hawkins a little bit. I think he's going to fall. I'm not sure that, because of the way that he plays and his frame and stuff, I don't think he's going to be a guy that comes in and starts right away, but he's certainly going to be a guy that comes in and plays right away. Jarrett Patterson from Buffalo is really interesting. He's another guy we're going to have to see his tests, but just crazy elusive, crazy productive, of course, this year as well. You talk about another guy, sort of in that phylum of like Motor Singletary, where it's just so hard to get your hands on him. He's just like so slippery. But it's a smaller guy that lacks that high end speed, and so the running backs like that, we got to look a bit more into them. Some of these kids, I mentioned Gainwell before, they shredded the G5, but we need to consider their athletic profiles and stuff like that a little bit more. Those are a couple guys. Kylan Hill is a guy that's fallen off quite a bit. Before Kylan Hill was considered a top 5 running back in this class. He ended up going back to Mississippi State last year, which is actually a cool thing at the time. It was a really deep running back class, and he ended up doing cool things with social justice as far as helping Mississippi change their law about the state flag by threatening to basically sit the season, and the flag came down shortly thereafter, and that stuff was all cool, but unfortunately for him, it just didn't pan out as expected during the season. Mississippi State just wasn't the team that we thought it could be. And, when you heading into that season with Costello there and in Leach's offense, you thought Kylan Hill is, very, very gifted receiver, and he's very explosive. You thought he could legitimately go off. I mean, because he might be the most talented back that Leach has worked with before and fit very well in that system. But Leach had a weird thing going on with Mississippi State this year. I don't know if Leach was trying to run the veterans off, or if the veterans, if it was just a bad group that was left over from the Joe Moorhead era. But there's some rotten apples going on there, and we saw it manifest in the bowl game. Kylan Hill was long gone by then. I'm not trying to say that Kylan was any part of that, but Leach was running off seniors left and right. Were leaving that team, opt-outs or transfers. And so he's one where I'd want to dig a little bit more into his situation. Again, it's just another unique situation of a specific prospect because of, this specific year. But we didn't see him as much in 2020. And I'd sort of like to, dig into why, because I was really excited to see him in that system. But he's a guy, if he gets into the right scheme, he can do so many different things. He's such a plus as a pass catcher that I could definitely see him excelling early as well.
Well, I wrote down all of those names because I was blown away by that James Robinson call. So I will be keeping a close eye on these guys. I've got one more question for you before we wrap up, and I'm going to ask both of you. Thor, I'll throw it to you first. Steph, I'll give you a couple minutes to think about this here. This one is for the fantasy football fans out there, but what is one situation that could happen in the draft that would just kill a top prospect's value that we should look out for? If this team drafts this player, they have no purpose whatsoever in fantasy. What's that one thing that we should keep an eye on this year?
Oh, like a team that took a skill player, but it neuters his fantasy viability because of the situation.
Right.
Is that what you mean?
That's what I'm asking. Yeah. Is there a situation? It looks like Steph might already have one. So let's let Steph answer this. You can speak about it first.
Neutered? Do you remember who said that? What did I say during the season that everyone was laughing? I wanted Bradbury to publicly neuter Metcalf. Anyways, it's just that's why I said that. It's just the neuter.
It can happen, unfortunately. But is there anyone you can think, do you think that there's a chance that one of these top quarterbacks could get drafted as a backup and, stashed by a team like that? Or, I'm just wondering if there's any situations that could potentially play out that you've thought of that could just crush somebody's fantasy football value.
Not, I mean, it would be hard to pick that in advance because obviously it's so specific as to the slot and as to the team and as to the situation. As far as the top couple quarterbacks, no, because I mean, it's going to be Jacksonville, and then if it is the Jets, it's going to be because they got rid of Darnold. Like the first 2-3 quarterbacks are probably going to have just an easy entryway into that. But of course, like Trey Lance isn't a guy for fantasy next year. And then like the running backs, it is extremely case specific. Right. The reason I liked Robinson, so like I liked Robinson as a prospect. I thought he should have gone 4th, 5th round or so in the draft. And so I was surprised when he didn't get drafted. But the reason I was so even more so bullish on him after he signed his UDFA contract was because of the situation that he wound up in, and it didn't take much forward thinking to think about, it doesn't really seem like Jacksonville wants to win this year. Leonard Fournette really doesn't have a place on this team. And, in May, you would have thought that they could get something for him in a trade last May. That didn't end up happening. But I mean, like the dots you needed to connect to Leonard Fournette no longer in Jacksonville. It didn't require a leap of the imagination. And then outside of that, it was, he's against Raekwon Armstead and Devine Azigbo, and the guys he was going against, it just wasn't very good competition. Like Raekwon can't catch the ball, for instance, and so like James Robinson, just by having a well-rounded skill set, and just he's a decent athlete as well, outside of the lack of high-end speed, which has now become a theme of us talking about these running backs. But like his skill set was almost even with Fournette there, but certainly without Fournette, it was inarguable that he had the most well-rounded skill set, if nothing else, in that room. And again, even with Fournette, you could start to make that argument. At that time, you could argue about where Robinson's ceiling was, but to me, the other points were inarguable. And so, that's why I was so bullish on Robinson specifically. And these guys in this class, it is a deeper running back class. You got the couple guys at the top that everybody knows about, but there's also a good second tier, third tier, and it goes down a bit. This is a deeper running back class, like I said, and the viability of those guys year one, especially, it's just going to depend on the situation that they fall into. James Robinson, it turns out that he got really lucky by going undrafted, right? Because, if he ends up going, maybe closer to where I thought in the 5th round, but he goes to a team that has an established starter, we might not have heard James Robinson's name last year, so it's a totally different, he wouldn't have changed any as a player, right? I would have had the same, I would have felt the same about him as a prospect, but it's just like the situation dictates some of that as well. And running backs, it is so dependent on the situation. And it's just so hard to, in advance, especially because it's a devalued position where they're going to fall, that we have a better idea of where the quarterbacks are going to land, even though we're, that's a lot of dart throwing too, but running backs, there's just no way to know right now,
Yeah. I know the one thing I've seen play out is some people are saying that, if Zach Wilson drops somehow to the Falcons, that they might take him and just stash him behind Matt Ryan, something like that. So that's kind of where I was getting at, but Steph, is there anybody specifically that you think, a team could take and stash a player that they just might not make an impact as a rookie, one of these top picks?
It's funny you say that, because I was just thinking back to last year. I was like, what was killer last year? So all of a sudden we saw teams like the Packers taking a quarterback where we didn't expect them to. The Eagles did the same thing. So I think if we get into this scenario where some of these, there's a lot of teams that have older quarterbacks. They have to start preparing. So if you take,
that's the Falcons with 4 right, keep jumping out to me as somebody who might be looking to replace Matt Ryan within the next few years.
It's crazy. I'm in some of these startups and I'm seeing, they take the picker to hold the spot. You're taking a quarterback at 104, a rookie quarterback? Are you crazy? You have no idea what's going to happen. That could be like, you have no idea. That's insane to me. You don't know what's going to happen. That could be someone that goes and sits on the bench for 4 years, and you just wasted that, thinking that that's going to be your starter. So the quarterback away from the quarterback.
There is so much speculation this time of year, and that's really all it is: speculation and rumors and predictions and all that. I personally cannot wait for the draft to be over so we can start looking at these situations and figuring out a little bit more. So, Thor, expect me to be in your DMs shortly after the draft, asking you what you think about some of these and getting a little one-on-one guidance from you. But wanted to thank you so much for coming on today. One last time before we sign off, Thor, if you want to let everyone know where they can find you and what you've got going on right now, that would be great.
Yeah, you can find me at ThorKU on Twitter, or come to MVC Sports Edge. I've been saying Rotor for so long. I'm trying to train myself. Come to MVC Sports Edge, and and check us out. We're gonna have all sorts of NFL draft stuff. My quarterback rankings are coming up next week, and then for me, it's just gonna be a procession, at least one a week, going forward until the draft of position rankings. I'll get done with those weeks before the draft, and then of course mock drafts, and I'll have a 500 player big board like I usually do, the Thor 500 with 500 player comps leading up to that. So come and check us out. We got all of our guys are working on draft stuff. We'll have all kinds of stuff.
Are you working on that? Is that on a deadline? Is there a time that we should expect that 500 board, or is that just something that you're gonna publish once you're done with it?
Yeah, we have a column scheduled through the end of the draft. I think right now, tentatively, it's like it might be scheduled for the Monday the week before, or the Tuesday week. It's sometime the week before, I think, is where it's tentatively on now. I think the past 2 years, I'm trying to think. One of the years, I think we, and it might have been both years where it was like draft week. But I thought maybe trying to get it out a little bit sooner this year. It's just a cool resource that people can print out, when the draft is going, that goes all, it's not just going to last through the 7 rounds. It'll last into when teams are signing UDFAs. And like I said, I've always loved, I love the draft. I know some analysts are like, oh, comps are, lowest common. I don't care. I like comps. Comps are fun. And it's not just for the top, again, like Lawrence, it's easy to come up with a comp for like Lawrence or, Zach Wilson. I disagree with some, like Zach Wilson. I see more Tony Romo. When I hear other people, their comps to Zach Wilson, they sound ridiculous to me, but they're smarter people than me. I think Daniel Jeremiah has said, I forgot if he says Kyler Murray or Pat Mahomes. And then, Miller says those guys, McShay, I think they all sort of say those guys. I don't see that whatsoever. Kyler Murray possesses a trump card of athleticism that Zach Wilson could never even dream of. And Pat Mahomes has to me, quite a bit stronger arm that allows him to do some of these things that Zach Wilson got away with at BYU again, that I'm not sure that he'll be able to get away with in the NFL. So I think comping him to guys like that, to me, it doesn't do the reader any service, but it's interesting because, comps are, it just helps to put a totem in the reader's head. And so I always liked that when I was a kid, and, when I would consume draft coverage coming up. And so I like to do that not only for the top guys, but, again, like the guys way down the board, all the way down to my 500th I even have comps for kickers, punters. Like it's just stuff that I enjoy. I'm a sicko, like Stephanie, you were talking about how you were a sicko before. I'm a sicko with this stuff.
It's an illness. I'm sick. It's like a problem, literally, because I'm so obsessed with it now.
Do we have any Sebastian Janikowski comparisons this year?
I don't think this year. Yes, Seabass. He was one of a kind. He was a fun prospect. He had like the big Polish lefty swinging kicker. But yeah, no, we'll have to see. Those are always interesting because then I got to get really into the weeds. But yeah, I'm already having fun with them. I've already started on them. Ian Book to Trace McSorley is my favorite silly one, but it's just true. They're the same person. And just down the line, just love comps.
I love it. Well, I will be looking out for that. I can't wait. I'm just going to block off an entire day on my schedule and go through that entire thing once you got that out. Steph, why don't you let everyone know where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Steffi Smalls with 3 L's. I'm having fun with the rookies. I think this is my first time on Twitter with the postseason. So normally it's just me not really, I'm paying attention, but not into the extent that I am right now. So I started today. I just put up to be edited. I'm going to start doing some player profiles on the rookies, but I don't want to do the players everyone talks about. I think I'm going to keep it to the guys that maybe aren't getting as much attention. And then in my rehab reports, since it's the off season, I don't have as many injuries to go through. I'm trying to break down the myths and facts of injuries, and I will single-handedly end injury prone. I am going to knock that word out of everyone's mouth.
And we're here for it. I'm sick of it as well. Of course, I am Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at DaveKluge_FF. You'll be able to find Steph and I here same time next week. We're going to have Nick Ercolano with BDGE. That is going to be a great show. And then you can also find us Tuesday morning. Well, not morning, but early afternoon, where we're going to be playing a Family Feud episode where it's going to be Steph and myself against Jacob Sanderson, FF_RTDB, and Peter Howard. So be sure to check those out next week. Again, I am Dave Kluge. Thank you for tuning in and letting me intervene in your fantasy life.